Hydration isn't only for athletes training, it's for all of us. It's a huge part of daily maintenance. When I was in Japan back in July, I spent plenty of time outdoors, walking from place to place. Just a hot, sweaty mess. While those convenience stores along the way had some refreshing drinks like Pocari Sweat, there was one thing I wish I had brought along with me for the trip. Liquid IV, the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. I found out about Liquid IV after getting back, and I'll say the convenient packaging alone makes this a must-bring wherever you're going, be it any type of travel, business or pleasure, after a workout, sometime outside in the heat, or maybe just after a long night with friends. With only one stick and 16 ounces of water, Liquid IV hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone, while taking in 5 essential vitamins, that's B3, B5, B6, B12, and C, and 3 times the electrolytes as leading sports drinks. It comes in 12 tasty flavors. My favorite, personally, is strawberry lemonade and tropical punch. Real people, real flavor, real hydrating. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use Krewe of Japan, KREWEOFJAPAN, at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order when shopping Better Hydration today using promo code Krewe of Japan at liquidiv.com. What are you waiting for? Get hydrated. Hello, I'm Doug, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
This time on Krewe of Japan podcast.
Welcome back to our podcast. On March 8th, at least March 8th here in the United States, Bird Studio released a statement announcing the shocking and unexpected death of the legendary pop culture icon Akira Toriyama. For decades, Toriyama's boundless imagination and unique style captivated audiences worldwide, leaving an everlasting mark on pop culture that transcends borders and generations. From his iconic creations like Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, to his groundbreaking contributions in pop culture in general, Toriyama's influence extends far beyond the shores of Japan. His impact was clearly on display in the form of tributes, thank yous, and heartfelt goodbyes from fans across pretty much every social media outlet. What went into Toriyama's journey to become such a creative visionary who brought us characters like Goku that permeate through the global pop culture scene? How was he shaped by his environment and the manga industry as a whole? To discover this, the crew is joined once again by our honorary, unofficial Krewe of Japan co-host Matt Alt, author of Pure Invention, How Japan Made the Modern World, to take a deeper look into the life and legacy of this titan of creativity. Together with Matt, we explore early successes that got Toriyama on track.
The people who succeed, the people who get big, or the people who get even just satisfied and happy are the ones who keep getting up and keep trying. And Toriyama is an example of that. And here's what happens. In 1980 or so, he makes Dr. Slump.
How Dragon Ball truly helped open the floodgates for Japanese pop culture into the world.
Dragon Ball Z, another insane evolution, because he basically takes it to another level. Dragon Ball Z is arguably even bigger than Dragon Ball, I think.
His impact outside of manga.
He is illustrating the packages and designing the characters for the Dragon Quest series of video games that become a phenomenon in Japan, like an absolute phenomenon on the Famicom.
And so much more. Akira Toriyama has had a profound impact on the fabric of culture around the world. From Goku's journey to the quirky charm of Dr. Slump, his work has touched the hearts of millions. Definitely
Over 9,000!
For sure. It has instilled lessons of friendship, perseverance, and the power of imagination. So grab your Nimbus Cloud and power up your Dragon Radar as we soar through the world of Akira Toriyama, celebrating his life, his legacy, and the characters that continue to shape our imaginations. Let's go. Here's what's going on with Japan Society New Orleans. Be sure to check the show notes for links and more information. Here we go. The 2024 Matsue New Orleans Sister City Exchange Program application is now live. This year celebrates the 30th anniversary of the Sister City relationship, and you won't want to miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Check the Japan Society website for more information, qualifications, and most importantly, the application itself. On Sunday, March 24th, Japan Society will be doing a group tour of the Go for Broke Spirit Legacy and Portraits exhibit at the World War II Museum. Check out the Japan Society event calendar for pricing and more details. For more information and details about these events and future events, follow us on the website and social media. Everything will be linked out in the show notes. Hope to see you there. So I have with us our unofficial co-host of the Crew of Japan podcast. Matt Alt. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Hello. It's always good. It's always good to be here. I wish I could be in New Orleans with y'all, but unfortunately, this digital version of me is going to have to suffice from being in Tokyo.
Well, we appreciate you always making time for us. So, and again, we got to catch up with you back in December, and looking forward to the next time.
Which is now.
I know, right?
Which is not. It's been a whole couple of months. Wow. So.
I'll be in Japan in the summer again, so
okay, great. Well, hey,
grab a cocktail or whatever.
Yeah, at Bar Lupin in Ginza, like we did last time. Let's do it.
I know. So, what else have you been up to lately? I know last time we talked, you were in New Orleans, and we were looking around at. We went to Ruby Slipper and for some fine dining.
Yes. Hiroko and I the pre-Christmas, Hiroko and I visited New Orleans because we always love to visit the city. And we're eating our way across New Orleans. It's funny though. It's like it's really a nightlife place, but we always go to bed really early and get up really early because we just love walking around at dawn, like on the Mississippi, or like, going out and getting some beignets from, Cafe du Monde or whatever and walking out down there. But yeah, it's been just getting up to speed, doing the usual stuff, translating for the usual suspects, writing articles for my newsletter, which supports the Pure Invention book. The newsletter is blog.pureinventionbook.com. And the book is Pure Invention, of course. Please find it at your local bookstore. But just basically doing a lot of stuff and watching Japanese pop culture, which is what I do. And I'm sure you are aware of the huge development in Japanese pop culture of this last week.
Yeah. Well, today in New Orleans time, it's March 11th in the evening, March 12th morning time in Japan.
Yes.
And this is kind of an emergency podcast. We last second scheduled this because of the news of the passing of a literal legend in the Japanese pop culture world. Akira Toriyama passed away actually March 1st.
Yes.
But, they didn't announce it really until the 8th here in America. So I guess that was morning time on the 9th for you guys, right? When the news officially broke?
Yeah, it hit on the 8th and it just, it rocked Japan. It was a very big deal. Because Akira Toriyama, for those of you who don't know who he is, was probably the biggest name in manga in the late 20th century. He rose to prominence in 1983 with a smash hit manga called Dr. Slump that sold something like 35 million copies, which would be enough for most people just to retire on for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But then he came back and did another manga series called Dragon Ball, perhaps you've heard of it, which went on to sell...
What's that?
I know, I heard it's a comic book of some kind using some sort of martial arts.
So there's only one, right?
There's only one ball. There's only one Dragon Ball. That's it. That's it. Once they find it, it's all done. And that went on to sell something like 10 times that many of copies, like 360 million copies. And he made contributions to games. He made contributions to cartoons. He's just, he even made contributions, as we'll get into, to emoji. He is just a massive, it's hard to imagine anybody else in Japan or really anywhere on the planet who had more of an impact on pop culture than Akira Toriyama. And he died way too young at 68 from an diagnosed unexpected condition. He had some sort of brain aneurysm, hematoma kind of thing. And it's just a huge tragedy for everybody.
Yeah, I was about to say it was pretty unexpected. I didn't hear any reports of him. And he kept his life pretty private to begin with. But, it was pretty sudden and out of nowhere from what I understand.
Absolutely. It was unexpected. There hadn't been any reports of him being sick. And, even though he wasn't making regular appearances, he had a new series called Sandland, and that had been animated and it was getting good reviews. And so he was still actively creating things. He might not have been on the forefront he wasn't a celebrity in any sense of him personally being out there, but he was a celebrity in the form of the avatars of him in his form of his work being out there. Just a huge shock. And it is true that in the manga industry, people tend to lead shorter lives than those outside of it.
I saw something this morning, I think. It was on Twitter about that. It was like 20 years shorter or something, the lifespan of those that are mangaka or just in general, something like that.
It's a kind of a sedentary lifestyle, and it's also a very stressful, hectic lifestyle. I don't know how many Westerners, even who are manga fans, realize just how stressful it is when first, you're stressed trying to get your manga picked up. Then you're stressed trying to build a fan base. And then once it does get picked up especially by a weekly magazine, you have to put out those panels every week. It requires drawing every day. You're often right up to the deadline. the more successful you get, the more you're able to hire assistants to help you, but then you have to manage them.
Yeah.
And then you have to manage your IP, is going to get turned into an anime. Are you going to manage that? You're being constantly pulled from all directions. So it's a very stressful lifestyle. Famously, Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Astro Boy, who is also known as the god of manga in Japan because he basically single-handedly established and shifted the direction of manga from kid stuff into a more mature medium in the late 40s and the 50s. He died at age 60, and so did Ishinomori Shotaro, his protege, who's famed for making series like the Power Rangers, the shows that, the storylines that became the Power Rangers, or like Kamen Rider, so many other hits. 60 years old, very, very young, I think, in the modern era. And so, in a certain sense, Toriyama's passing fits that pattern, unfortunately.
Have you ever seen, there's a movie, I cannot remember the name. I saw it when I was on a plane flying to Minneapolis. I had some time to kill. And it was a Japanese movie, but it was about a high school kid who was aspiring to be a mangaka.
Right.
And it was him and another kid who were kind of like rivals. And then it was just showing the lifestyle of, I can't remember the name for the life of me.
There's a really famous and highly recommended for anybody who is into manga to jump series. It's called Bakuman.
Mm-hmm. That was it.
Yeah, Bakuman.
Yeah.
And Bakuman is about two kids, they're rivals who become partners. One's like an illustrator, one's a story, like a script writer. Uh-huh. And it's the story of how you make a hit in Shonen Jump magazine. And everything's been kind of cloaked, you know what I mean? It's not like, they can have fun with it. And the types of people who succeed, it really does a good job of portraying them. It portrays the kind of human algorithm that's involved in like getting a manga. Because when your manga is in the pages of the magazine, traditionally readers would send in these postcards ranking not only their favorite titles, but their favorite characters and things like that. And that feedback, the editors would pump it right back into the artists. And most importantly, it shows how much, especially at Shonen Jump, it's not really an artist's game, it's an editor's game. And that's something that's really key. And we'll get into a little bit more with this with Toriyama. I mean, of course, the talents are immense for the writers, the scripters, the illustrators, but it's the editors who really shape these creative products into massive franchises, using their own veteran experience and things like that, their own internal systems and stuff at Shonen Jump, Shueisha. So Bakuman is a really great read if you're into manga to learn more about how manga are or were traditionally made.
Okay, yeah, that was the movie. I think it was the live action adaptation of the manga. It was really interesting to see from that perspective because you hear so much about it, but this kind of got into the weeds of like the stress and the lifestyle. You have to forego pretty much everything to focus on literally this one thing.
You're sitting there like 20 hours a day in front of a drafting table. It's not a balanced lifestyle.
Definitely develop unhealthy habits.
Right. Well, I think probably by, when you're Toriyama's age, a lot of mangaka retire pretty early. Otomo Katsuhiro, who we all know from Akira, he doesn't really draw manga anymore. He prefers to direct movies, live action movies and animated movies sometimes. Because drawing manga is just very, very stressful. And so by the time you get to the level of him or to a Toriyama, generally you are not involved in the day-to-day of drawing. You're kind of just doing the character designs and the big, plotting, the big plot points and stuff like that. It's rare when you have a situation like Tezuka Osamu, who is literally doing everything up until the very end. Literally to the very end, his last words on his deathbed were, "Please let me work," as the nurses were like bringing the crash cart up, trying to like revive him. And he's trying to draw at the same time, practically. It's crazy. So, I mean, there are people like that. And, forgive me for laughing. It's just, I love Tezuka. It's just that image of him as somebody who will not stop working is so entwined with his legend. It's sad. It's sad when a great creative force like a Tezuka or like a Toriyama passes away.
Let's get into the actual tribute itself.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, Toriyama's major impact came from manga and eventually his things that were adapted into anime at some point down the line. But he had a lot of failed works early on, like things that almost discouraged him away from pursuing manga and almost moving out of that. But then he had, what was it? Wonder Island, I think is what it was called.
Yeah, he did Wonder. I guess like a lot of manga artists, he was starting with parodies of things. And I think if I recall, his very first attempt at drawing a published manga was some sort of parody of Star Wars. But then, Wonder Island came out in 1978. But it did badly. Like it was, I think it finished last or something like that. Remember we were talking about those cards that readers send in. Mm-hmm. So it came in like dead last.
Yeah,
this was not a good sign for this guy. but it's a testament, I think, to the system at Jump. Toriyama isn't submitting his work into a vacuum. He is working with this guy named Kazuhiko Torishima. And Torishima, Tori, maybe this is why they were attracted to one another.
The
They both
Bird
have
Bros.
birds
That's
in
why
their names.
Bird Studios.
But exactly. Torishima was a veteran editor at Shonen Jump, and he saw something in Toriyama. And he worked very, very, very closely with Toriyama to hone his subsequent manga. And he was Toriyama's editor on Dr. Slump, and he would become Toriyama's editor. He would continue as Toriyama's editor on Dragon Ball. So I don't think a lot of fans know his name, but Torishima is as integral to the success of Toriyama's works as Toriyama himself was.
Yeah, when I was reading up on his backstory, because again, I know who he is from everything that he's done that's popular, but I didn't really know much about his early days. And when I was reading that, it jumped out to me that there was this guy that was so key into his success early on that really pushed him.
Yeah.
That really he's behind the scenes. You don't really hear much about him.
There's this tendency, particularly in America, to celebrate this kind of great man or great woman theory where just this genius is dropped onto this planet and instantly succeeds at everything they do. And Toriyama's path shows you that the road to success is not a straight line. Even if you're an incredibly talented and hardworking person, you need to fail, get up again, try again. Is this starting to sound like Dragon Ball or something like that? Power up to reach the next level. Once you hit 9,000, then you can finally submit your manga for a publication. But seriously, it's a story of collaboration and of honing, not just having talent, but working with other people to hone your talent, working together. Manga is often seen as a solo endeavor, and it can be, but Jump, it's not. It's very much a collaborative sport. And Toriyama and Torishima are probably the wonder duo of certainly of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
They had so much after he had those flops.
Yeah.
He had a couple successes along the way. I know he had, actually, I have the English translation Jump app on my phone where you can kind of go through and read like the digital versions of stuff. And it's on there, like the manga anthology. I think it's Manga Theater is what it's called in English. But basically, it's an anthology of all his one-shots that he had over the course of, his career.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of those come out in those early years. And then there was another one called Garukeiji Tomato or Tomato.
Yeah, tomato detective girl or something like that.
Yeah.
These are like, I've never even seen these on the shelves of like the used bookstore at Mandarake. These are minor manga.
But apparently that's the one that really had a little bit of success and is what kind of gave him the juice to, okay, let me do something else with another
tomato
female
juice.
lead. Yeah, tomato juice. There you go. Yeah.
I think the thing that this shows about him in these early years is just he would not give up.
Yeah.
And he was talented, but he was having a hard time. There's a really famous quote from Miles Davis where he says something like, "Man, sometimes it takes a really long time for you to sound like you."
Yeah.
And this is exactly what's going on with Toriyama at this period. There's no doubt he's an amazing illustrator, but he's still trying to find himself storytelling-wise. And I love this arc of his history because it's so, it's such fits and starts. Like now we think of him as the invincible Toriyama.
Yeah.
But in 80, he was not. He was definitely not invincible. This is like, we're talking 78. So he's born in 1955, right? So this is like, he's like 23, 4 years old. And he's really struggling.
Yeah. He definitely had his struggles. And when I was 25, I mean, I'm pretty sure I struggled.
Right. Yeah, sure.
I think I had just come back from Jet and was like trying to find my place back here in the US after being in Japan for 3 years. And that,
you should have called editor Torishima. Maybe he could have shaped you
right?
up. He could have been your life coach.
Took a bunch of job rejections to finally land something. And, but it's what it takes.
It does. No, it does. You have to keep, this is not this is suddenly turning into a self-help podcast, but you have to keep getting up again. Like even when you are knocked down by life, the people who succeed, the people who get big or the people who get even just satisfied and happy are the ones who keep getting up and keep trying. And Toriyama is an example of that. And here's what happens. In 1980 or so, he makes Dr. Slump.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a comic book series that isn't really hugely known in the States, but it was atomic-sized hit, like just massive in Japan in the early 80s. And how to describe this? It's called Dr. Slump because that's the name of this kind of mad scientist guy who is an inventor of all sorts of things. And he invents this little robot girl who turns out to be this incredible superwoman little girl. And it sparks all of these wild adventures in their little village where they live.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a simple plot, but the openness of that allowed him to turn Dr. Slump into what, and I'm going to quote my good buddy on the Pure Tokyoscope podcast, Patrick Macias here. He calls Dr. Slump the Mad Magazine of the manga world. It's full of parodies to other like movies, manga, like Godzilla shows up, Gamera shows up. Oh, there's Superman. Oh, here's like the Star Wars guys. And like, there's this kind of constant drama and like love stories and like, you know, schoolyard things happening in the village. But all sorts of like aliens are attacking, you know, oh, you know, here's the alien, you know, from like the alien movies. Like it's just all sorts of random stuff is happening all the time. And it's drawn with this incredible draftsmanship, but it's super kind of kawaii looking.
Yeah.
And it's also, this is the big thing, super scatological. Like the characters are constantly like farting. There's like this running joke where Arare, the little girl protagonist, loves picking up coiled poop on a stick and like running after other characters with it. You know, so it's like super, but it's vulgar without being like super vulgar. It's like kind of cute vulgar in the way that like a 5-year-old is, not like in the way that like a 25-year-old is, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And it just was a huge hit. Did you read any of Dr. Slump? Have you ever seen it?
You know, I've caught little pieces of it, but again, it's one of those things that didn't really make it to the States. And when I was growing
until late,
until way later. And even then, you know, I think I had just gotten way too busy or just didn't have the time for it at some points where I just...
Oh, well, you didn't want to read about poop on a stick when you were a grown up? I can't believe it. It's funny though. So like Toriyama was a kind of, one of his things was to make anthropomorphic characters of everything. The sun would have a little face on it and be singing. The trees would have faces on them and be singing. And, you know, this all leads into Japan's penchant for anthropomorphizing things, like whether they're yokai or cute characters or whatever. But he was a master of it. And even that poop had, I know I keep bringing this back to poop, but it's just important, had a little smiling face on it. It would be like laughing and screaming when like Arare is flinging it. The way he drew it is considered by many people, and including people in the emoji industry, to be the roots of the poop emoji. Like the way it looks, the little face on it, that's all kind of inherited from Dr. Slump. A lot of the emoji, especially the earliest palettes of them, are directly influenced by manga motifs. You know, like the little bubble of snot coming out of your nose when you're asleep, or like the way the tear of sweat comes down on your forehead when you're feeling embarrassed or whatever. The emoji designers borrowed that from various mangaka. The poop was definitely borrowed from Dr. Slump. So he also had that influence on culture too. This was a really, really big thing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's not really widely known because it's like, who really wants to talk about this? But you know, it is culture. It's culture.
It is.
It's pop culture. The funny thing though is that Toriyama. So let's bring this back to what we were talking about before. Toriyama did not envision Arare, the little girl, as the hero of the comic. He thought it was going to all be about Dr. Slump, the mad scientist, which makes sense. He's a mad scientist who makes all sorts of wacky gadgets. He's kind of like a Doraemon sort of character. But it was Torishima, his editor, who said, no, this Arare is testing really well in the reader feedback. Everybody loves her. You're going to make this series about her. And the entire Dr. Slump became about Arare's adventures, and Dr. Slump became a side character. So this just goes to show you that even this, you know, genius of Toriyama couldn't see the bigger picture at first of where this huge hit was going to go. And it was his editor who kind of sculpted that. I've read online that like some people in the West think that he wanted to make a girl-focused series. I don't think that's true. I think he wanted to make a series with this kind of mad scientist guy who he saw as an avatar of himself. And it was just only through reader feedback and his editor that it became the massive hit that it was. And it was big, like 35 million copies, like no joke.
Yeah.
Can retire on that money, man.
You think he would retire off of that money, but he didn't, right?
No.
It didn't stop there.
Did not, but I think you know what came next. So like he kind of retires from Dr. Slump, and then his editor says, hey man, maybe you should do something with martial arts in it.
Do some stuff with martial arts. And I know there was a couple other things that he did on the side. Yeah. I can't remember the names of them, but I mean, I don't think anyone does really, except for maybe some really super otaku, like
right.
Toriyama fans. But there's a thing called Dragon Ball.
What is this?
With a little kid named Goku who has a tail, and he's looking around for, well, he's not initially. He's got his little Dragon Ball that he calls his grandpa because grandpa passed away.
Right.
And that is, to him, the spirit of his grandpa is in this Dragon
Right.
Ball, which is an orange ball with red stars on it.
Yes.
And eventually links up with some friends or some people that become his friends. And they go in search of these magic Dragon Balls that can grant wishes.
Yeah, it was a parody of the Chinese classic Journey to the West.
Yep.
Again, parody. Were you a ballie? What do you call this? A draggy? What is it, like a Trekkie? What do you call a Dragon Ball fan? Were you one in real time?
No. So I didn't catch on to Dragon Ball. I think there was initially a Dragon Ball, like the initial Dragon Ball came out, and I don't even know if the full series did or if it was like a movie.
Right.
And I didn't catch on to that. I got into it in high school, which would have been around 2000 or 2001. Somewhere around that area.
Okay.
And that was peak Toonami.
Wow, you were in high school in 2000? That was a space odyssey for me.
I know.
2001. But you were actually in high school. Wow.
I was in high school. I was a sophomore, I think, at that time. And
Right.
a couple friends just, introduced me to it and got hooked. We would always go to the local comic book store on the way home and go pick up the bootleg copies of VHS tapes
right. Yes, nice.
Because that was the only way you can jump ahead,
nice.
A few seasons to find out what the heck's going on, because we were stuck in, the early chapters for quite a long time here. So, I got all the VHS tapes that had like the pictures on the side from Suncoast that kind of, when you get all the...
Suncoast, nice name drop. Wow, I haven't thought... No, that's a name I've not heard in a long, long time.
I know. Oh my God. Suncoast is where I lived in high school whenever I go to the mall.
Wow, Suncoast. Yeah. So Dragon Ball, the original arc of Dragon Ball dropped when I was probably junior high, in the mid-late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing the character of Goku, Son Goku, the little boy version of Son Goku, and thinking, wow, this is a really cool design. But in the when I was your age, we didn't have translated manga. And so there was no way for me to read it or any of my friends to read it. And I had a couple Japanese friends, and I think they had some tankobon, and we'd flip through. But Dr. Slump is kind of this visually frenetic, kind of nonstop parody. And Dragon Ball has more of a narrative arc. Mm-hmm. And it is really cool. It has a lot of awesome illustrations, and especially those covers, man. Those Toriyama covers. Oh my God. And it was kind of tough to follow the nuances of it. And so I didn't really get into it like I probably would have had I been able to read it. So I'm the kind of person who, I really felt like I was missing out. I actually have a lot of, I don't know if jealousy is the word, but envy of people like you who grew up in an era when you did have access to at least some dubbed, subbed things. Because we had really very, very little in the 80s. And it was like a taunt. It was a tease. Oh, you big tease, Japan.
Well, you had to go get those bootleg VHS tapes from conventions and stuff, right? I know you guys talk about that on your podcast.
For sure. All my Miyazaki stuff, Totoro, Laputa, Nausicaa, all of that I had to watch untranslated. And we just had to piece it together there were all these anime magazines like Animag and Anime Zine and all of these things. And sometimes they would run plot summaries and you'd kind of have to piece it together.
Yeah.
So we had to walk up to school uphill both ways. Through snow up to our necks. Your listeners are probably all like, okay, boomer. But it was tough back then. It was tough. But that's when Dragon Ball hit, late 80s.
When I kind of caught on to it, it was just, I was riding the wave that was just starting to take off with, I think it was on WB or CW, I guess now.
Right. And
then switched over to Toonami on Cartoon Network.
Right.
And in the States. And I think it was in different channels in Canada or other places. Right. But yeah, I mean, that was my rush home from school to try to catch it, because you didn't have a DVR. Nice. It's new episodes. You had to set a record, tape it. Yeah. Oh my God.
No, it was Robotech for me. Robotech was my rush home from school thing. But, so two things here. Dragon Ball, again, seems like a no-brainer, massive hit. What a genius talent. What an amazing guy, right? But what a lot of fans don't know is just how much Toriyama pushed Toriyama to make this series. And in an interview many, many years later, Toriyama recalled cleaning out his office and finding 500 failed starts for Dragon Ball that Toriyama had turned into him and Toriyama had rejected. Now, you got to think about this, right? Toriyama is already an incredibly wealthy success. He's made a manga, Dr. Slump, that sold 35 million copies. And we're forgetting something here, that in between these things, he is illustrating the packages and designing the characters for the Dragon Quest series of video games that become a phenomenon in Japan, like an absolute phenomenon in the Famicom, the Nintendo Entertainment System. The games themselves are not particularly groundbreaking because they're just like, top down, very symbolic looking because the graphics weren't that good, like games like Ultima and things like that, role-playing games that you played on your Famicom. But thanks entirely to Toriyama's character designs, because he made the packages, and also he designed what all the bad guys looked like, all the monsters that you fought. And they had that Dr. Slump look. They're kind of like, they look kind of like a fusion between Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball sensibilities.
Yeah, there's definitely a way, like you could tell when something is his art, it's, especially his older art versus his more recent, where it was like more, I guess now it's more pointed, and obviously he didn't do Dragon Ball Super, but it got a little bit more sharp. Yeah. Whereas in the beginning, everything was a little bit rounder and but it all had the same like features.
It's kind of like Sanrio for boys.
Yeah.
There's like a real Hello Kitty kind of simplicity to it. And I mean that as high praise, but he's channeling it into these like amazing looking like aircraft and like motorcycles and like really cool looking like characters and monsters, of course. Just think about this. You have drawn the single most popular comic book on the planet, Dr. Slump. And like, I think you can make the argument it's the biggest comic on the planet, because I don't know of any American comics that were selling 35 million copies at that time. He was selling that many over the course of a couple years in the 80s, right? And then you're hired as the character designer on what becomes the biggest video game franchise in Japan, to the point where like people are cutting school, they're cutting work. Like it's a national epidemic of people playing this game.
To this day.
So you're a millionaire. You're successful. Everybody knows your name. You feel like you've hit success. You start turning in the pages for what's going to become your next manga. And the editor's like, no, dumb. Do it again. Do it again. Do it again. 500 times. It's like that movie Whiplash. Except the difference in Whiplash is that kid's a nobody. Toriyama is a somebody. He's very much a somebody. He could have retired and we'd still be celebrating him now when he passed away. But he went through it because he is so dedicated to manga and he wanted to make something even bigger than what he had done. And he trusted Torishima, and he made Dragon Ball as a result. Like Torishima was right to kind of like torture him this way. It's like making Deadpool, like they put him in that like torture device, and then like suddenly this dude like comes out as Deadpool, the invincible, superhero, like in the first movie. Basically, this is Torishima is doing that to Toriyama, like putting him in this torture box. And then he comes out as like the creator of Dragon Ball. It's pretty amazing.
Dragon Ball itself starts out more as kind of an adventure. It has some fighting in it, but it's more of an adventure series. But then it turns into, like you said, a more martial arts driven storyline and narrative, especially as you get into Dragon Ball Z. Towards the end of Dragon Ball, it kind of goes that way, but then...
Well, that's like straight up superheroes, like, superheroes fighting each other. Do you know what I mean? It's almost got an American comic sensibility to it a little bit, in a broad sense, certainly not in any of its aesthetics. But yeah, I mean, Dragon Ball, the original one, is, like I said, it was a parody of Journey to the West, which is a narrative kind of fantasy adventure sort of thing from ancient China. And he's kind of mapping that onto this more modern fantasy world. But yeah, it's an adventure, looking for the Dragon Balls and stuff. But Dragon Ball Z, another insane evolution, because he basically takes it to another level. Dragon Ball Z is arguably even bigger than Dragon Ball, I think.
Yeah, I think that Dragon Ball Z is what hooked people in the States.
Right.
More so than Dragon Ball. Yeah. People found out about Dragon Ball after the fact and went back and said, oh, I want to find out Goku's roots, and where he come from. But yeah, it was a complete evolution of how the show actually told its story. It told its story through fighting and growth of a character through getting stronger. And the whole drive is just getting stronger. It's not like, let's go look for something, let's go look for a Dragon Ball here or there. They still did that over the course of, every season or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just the way they did it. It was just, I think it was the character design. I think it was the way that they told the story and made you kind of pulled you into these characters.
Right.
And there were so many, especially when you were early on, when they didn't have the back lore of Dragon Ball readily available. You had all these like nuggets of like, callbacks and things like that.
Yeah.
It fell on, I don't want to say deaf ears, but like in the States, at least, no one really got it until you went back and watched Dragon Ball.
Dragon Ball Z, I think, is one of those rare cases. Everybody wants to world build now. It drives me crazy because you go into just some random movie and like they're so obsessed with world building, they forget to tell a story. Well, Dragon Ball Z had the world building and it had the story, but then it actually had the background lore. And so like, because Westerners came to that afterwards, In Japan, you were watching it in order, and I was like, "Oh, okay, kid. Now he's a teenager. Now he's an adult," kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it must have been pretty mind blowing for Dragon Ball Z fans to then go back and see, wow, this is just as good in a different way, just as developed, just as everything. Because normally when you do we're going to go back and do the prequels after something gets big, and it doesn't have that same power because you're coming back to it later. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
the history of Dragon Ball versus Dragon Ball Z feels real because it really did come before Dragon Ball Z,
Yeah, and then Dragon Ball Z just kept going. Like, it was like you said, it just level up. All right, we hit a new peak. Nope, no, we didn't. Got to take it to the next peak. But continuing the story and evolving the characters, similar to how Goku evolved, you had his children that were growing up with him, and
right.
You got to see their story evolve and develop.
Well, that's the Jump system, the Jump model. It's they don't want a self-contained story. They want something that can be continued and teased out over and over endlessly, whether it's One Piece, whether it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, the Jump system is designed to make long-form, endless narrative entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, how many tankobon of Dragon Ball are there? Like, there's hundreds of One Piece.
Yeah.
I mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh! Before. I don't know if people realize this. How do you know Yu-Gi-Oh? It's a card game, right? That's how you know it. That was just like one minor aspect of the original, very early manga.
I know.
And it turned out that was what readers are really reacting to. And so with the editor, I don't know if it was Toriyama, I don't know who the Yu-Gi-Oh! Artist editor was. Together, they shifted it to make it all about the card game. And that resulted in this blockbuster among blockbusters. So especially when you're talking Shonen Jump, I love Toriyama, Akira, Oda, all of these big names who deserve all the respect they get, but it is I'm repeating myself, a collaborative art form. These guys and gals occasionally I wish there were more gals. It's mainly guys. It's all guys on the editorial side. This is actually something that's a bit of a controversial thing at Jump. But Demon Slayer, whatever the case is, it's always done in concert together with the editorial staff and the readers. So you have this kind of dance going on, like a feedback loop. And that's what makes these big hits.
You're absolutely right. And we'll touch on that in a second. But just the influence of Toriyama's work in the industry, did it further evolve the industry? Or did it change it from what the standard was at that point? Or did it change it to what it became now? I feel like the One Pieces, the Narutos, the My Hero Academias, all these, there's a bunch of characters that you develop on the side in addition to the main character. And each character has its own fandom, right? There's people who fall in love with different ones. Prior to Dragon Ball, was there something similar to that?
Arguably, that whole kind of caste system where and by CAST, not cast, CASTE, but that whole having a big cast arguably dates back to Osamu Tezuka, where he had his whole stable of characters and they would show up in different comics and things like that. And even if they weren't the main one, maybe you had a favorite. So that's been a thing in manga for a very, very long time, since at least the 50s.
Yeah.
But Jump arguably perfected it. And I think you can argue that certainly the success of Dragon Ball gave them a lot more confidence in their system. I mean, if you sell 360 million units of anything, it'll give you a little bit of confidence.
Just a bit.
But I have read that Dragon Ball, along with Slam Dunk and some other titles, almost single-handedly supported the rise of Shonen Jump from the 80s into the mid-90s. It was selling huge. Its peak in 1996, what was it, 100 million copies a week?
Yeah.
Just a crazy, crazy amount of copies were going out. And Dragon Ball played a huge role in that. And so I'm sure that, Shueisha said to themselves, oh, well, we're onto something here. I mean, why wouldn't you? Guys, right, I certainly would. In 1995, that was the peak. Weekly Shonen Jump was selling 6.5 million copies a week. A week!
That's crazy.
It's crazy time, man. And so in America, Americans were like, oh, American comics, Superman, Batman, these are the great characters. But I think if you put the entire American comic book industry together, they weren't selling 6.5 million copies in a week in the United States. I don't know what the circulation numbers were. This is just one magazine. In the West, I think in America in particular, Iron Man, Batman, these have become almost loss leaders for the money that's pulled in by the movies, the Avengers and stuff like that. The thing that Americans have done an amazing job of is translating American comic book culture to the silver screen. I don't think anybody has done as good of a job as translating comic books to live action as the Marvel people have. great stuff. Like, I don't think Japan certainly hasn't managed to pull that off with live action. They arguably have with animated adaptations of their works, certainly.
Sure.
Yeah, in America, it's all about, like, the comic books are kind of like this, you know, you almost give them away to bring people into the movie theater. That's certainly not the case in Japan. People buy the manga, and the mangaka get extraordinarily wealthy off of them. So they make all their money, by the way, off of the comic books. Generally speaking, when you sign up with Jump, you are kind of signing over your rights in a lot of ways. They manage everything. You don't get royalties off of the movies, which might seem like a real bummer, but you do get like an upfront payment. Like, thank you. Okay, we're going to use your characters. But you make your money from selling the tankobon, the collected copies of the stories that were told in weekly serials in Shonen Jump.
Yeah.
And that's extraordinarily lucrative. Like Demon Slayer, Gotoge Yoshiharu, and I'm saying they because we don't even know their gender for sure, even though people think that it's a woman. Demon Slayer, the first movie was the biggest selling film on the planet. Like, it was the biggest grossing film on the planet in 2000. Just absolutely global smash phenomenon. They did not make any money off of that, but then they had something like 17 books on the bestseller list at the same time as all of the tankobon went up there, which is crazy. Like, again, you'd be happy to have one book on the bestseller list.
Right.
But like, you know, issues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know what I mean? Like, all of those are going up the bestseller. Like, the bestseller charts are like, you know, like 1 down to whatever the last copy was are all being, so they're making a ton of money off the books. And in the States, you know, you'd probably sue. You'd be like, okay, well, you know, I want a bigger piece of this pie. That doesn't happen in Japan.
Yeah.
I think most mangaka aren't great business people. You know, they're artists, and they kind of trust their futures in Shonen Jump. And Shonen Jump is making huge amounts because they do get the royalties off the movies.
Oh, for sure.
They also share in the royalties of the books. So it's a big business, and it's not just for creative sake at all. And you're not like a free agent. You are definitely in the system, locked into it when you sign up with Jump. But, you know, the payoffs are potentially astronomical.
Yeah, for sure. Let's bring it back to Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
Akira Toriyama didn't just... Dragon Ball Z ended, I forget which year specifically.
I think it was, 97?
Was it 97? Okay.
Ish.
Yeah, something like... I know it was still coming out, but I think the manga was already finished and it was just being adapted, right? I can't remember when that ended. But he took a little bit of a break, and he had other projects that he did on the side. Like, I think you mentioned Sandland earlier is getting adapted to an anime. That I remember actually reading that when they had the US like monthly Shonen Jump they launched back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Sandland was one of the comics that they actually pushed out as part of that.
Yes.
And, you know, he worked on that, and he had some other things that he worked on. But then he returned to Dragon Ball in 2012 with Dragon Ball Super, but was more of the writer with a new counterpart, Toyotaro, as his illustrator.
Yeah, because he wants to kind of outsource it at this point. You don't want to be somebody. Look, you know, I don't know what our average age of listeners are here, but you know, when you hit middle age, you do not want to be spending all day hunched over a drawing board or even sitting in front of a desk if you don't have to. Your body gets cranky, man. And so I get it. He's definitely, you know, wants to kind of outsource it at this point.
Yeah, for sure. He did. And I mean, that's still been going on even to this day. I think it's still running. And obviously, I'm not sure what the future holds for that with, you know, maybe the story has been mapped out and everything. And then the artist will continue his legacy through that. I'm not sure. That's
the other thing about signing up with Jump. You know, it's kind of like they control the IP. So they could theoretically hire somebody to continue. And I'm sure, you know, I don't think Toriyama has been involved on a day-to-day level in plotting out or making the latest Dragon Ball movies and things like that. It's a committee at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows what the future will hold. But by the way, just to correct myself, I realized when I was talking about, you know, the whiplash style training of Toriyama into his final form, he actually didn't work on Dragon Quest, the video game designs, until after Dragon Ball came out. And that was actually, again, Torishima saying, hey, we just got this request for character designs. Why don't you do it? And so he did it. And that turned out to be a big thing, too. But my point still stands. Dr. Slump was massive. Like, he didn't have to put up with that.
Right.
But he did because he wanted to go to the next level.
You brought up Dragon Quest, and we talked a lot about that earlier. But just, you know, his legacy in anime and manga is one thing. And then in gaming is, like you mentioned, his impact in how he changed the gaming industry with Dragon Quest's character design. That was what separated it from its other, you know, run-of-the-mill RPG style, like Famicom games. And he gave those characters life that still continues to
because
this
they're
day.
just pixels on the screen, right?
Right,
You know,
right.
and he made it so that when you were looking at those pixels, you thought of his characters.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty amazing thing to do.
Yeah. His gaming impact, it was that. And then there was, I think, Chrono Trigger he also worked on too as well.
Yeah,
right?
he did Chrono Trigger too. I mean, at a certain point, like you want this guy, he's like a rabbit's foot for your video game. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hard enough making a video game, but then like having this like massive, awesome, legendary character designer on it. Well, that's just the icing on the cake. I'm sure he was not cheap to work with. You know, they were just, you know, it was that just Square at that point. I don't think they were Square Enix or Square, they were Square Soft probably at that point when they were working with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Chrono Trigger designs. It's, again, you know, just to bring this back to what we were talking about at the beginning, it's hard to imagine anybody else who has had such an impact on so many aspects of Japanese pop culture, which is now to say global pop culture. Illustrated entertainment in the form of manga and anime, digital culture in the form of video games, and indirectly emoji. And just in that sense of style where something can be small and cute but strong. You know, like manga in the 70s in particular was a really macho kind of field for boys manga.
Yeah.
It was coming off the trend for Gekiga in the 1960s, which is like kind of what all the student protesters read. You had these like sweaty, muscular protagonists like, you know, Ashita no Joe, Tomorrow's Joe, the legendary boxing manga. And even in kids manga and anime, like, you know, Mazinger Z and things like that, you had these super hyper macho protagonists. Suddenly with Dr. Slump, and then even more so in Dragon Ball, like Son Goku looks like a little kid.
Yeah.
He's a little kid, and yet he's incredibly powerful. So this idea that you can be small and sweet, but yet incredibly strong, I think is a very, like a uniquely Japanese contribution to superhero manga and comic books around the world. Like Goku is cute. It's like that's completely not the way that a masculine hero was ever portrayed in a boys comic book before that.
I would almost say like it's similar in the regard of like how Deadpool is very unserious.
Right, yes. Yeah.
You know? Like he's like falling around and accidentally like doing things. But like Goku kind of did the same thing. It was doing that way before.
I get what you're saying, but you know, I really honestly believe that the influence of manga and anime and things from Japan is about much more than the direct influences. Like, you know, the Americans make an adaptation of Speed Racer or something like that. Those are interesting. But to me, the real influences and impact of Japan, the much more interesting ones are the ways are much more subtle and much more profound. Like in the way that we as adults, you know, continue to consume things like cartoons that we wouldn't have in previous generations. That we are, you know, we find the same things Japanese audiences find funny, not just because we were raised on these things, but because our society is sort of hitting points that Japanese society did a little bit before us. I mean, this is the stuff, this might sound familiar because this is my argument in Pure Invention, how Japan made the modern world, on sale at a bookstore near you. But it's true. And it's one of the reasons I think that we are the way we are in modern life. It's because of all the Japanese stuff that we consumed, Dragon Ball included.
So I got a couple quick questions for you. It's more like quick hitters than anything else before we wrap everything up. Which do you think is more impactful in Toriyama's career, Dr. Slump or Dragon Ball?
Well, see, for me, it's Dr. Slump because I grew up on it. And, you know, the thing about manga and anime is if you're a manga and anime fan, manga and anime began with your favorites. You know, it's like, you know what I mean? If you're an anime fan, anime begins and ends with the first anime you ever saw. Because it's an adolescent medium by nature. And I don't mean that condescendingly. Like it bubbles with adolescent energy. It has to. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So for me, it will always, always, always be Dr. Slump. Sorry, Dragon Ball fans.
No, it's okay. Because I mean, I'm a Dragon Ball fan, self-proclaimed Dragon Ball fan. But I would agree, Dr. Slump, because you wouldn't have Dragon Ball if you didn't have Dr. Slump. Dr. Slump is what got you Dragon Ball. So in terms of his career, I don't want to say he wouldn't have had a career, but I don't think he would have had the same trajectory of a career if Dr. Slump hadn't hit. He may have still come out at some point with Dragon Ball, but maybe he wouldn't have.
Maybe we should be saying we're all the biggest fan of Mr. Toriyama Jump because he's the guy who guided Toriyama. You know, maybe I'm actually a fan of Toriyama's editorial style. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yes, I'll be Dr. Slump.
He pushed the right buttons for sure.
Dr. Slump forever. The first manga I really fell in love with.
So next, how did Akira Toriyama's work impact you? Specifically, like what of his work, and maybe you already answered this with Dr. Slump, but like what thing did he create that impacted you the most?
Rather than any one specific design, I would say that it's his sense of being able to draw things in a really stylized way, a
Okay.
really cute way, but cool at the same time. And so I used to obsess over the covers of both Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball because he would put these characters in these amazingly drawn vehicles and stuff like that. And I just really like, whether it's the kind of the Capsule Corporation, like some kind of weird motorcycle or plane or hovercraft or something. And I was reading like Otomo's Akira at the same time as I was looking at these things. And they're kind of mirror images of one another. Otomo is this unbelievable draftsman for like realistic looking art. And Toriyama's an unbelievable draftsman too, but instead of drawing it realistically, because you know he could if he wanted to.
Right.
But he deliberately drew it in this Sanrio-ified, what if Hello Kitty had a tank kind of thing. And I just loved that. I loved that incongruous mashup of cute and cool at the same time. He really taught me, and I think the world, that you can be small and chibi and squashed, but awesome.
You brought up the covers, and you brought it up multiple times. When I was reading the Jump manga, the covers are so different from the rest of the story.
Yes,
like completely
exactly.
different.
Yes.
Whereas like, in Western comics, it's always kind of somewhat tied to the story on the inside, almost as a variant.
Yeah, it's almost like a still frame of whatever battle is going on inside the pages.
Right. But on Toriyama's Dragon Ball, it's never that. It's always like Goku riding a dragon that doesn't exist in the series, by the way.
Yes.
Riding it around like through the clouds. And it's just so stylistically, like beautifully drawn.
Well, they're about vibes.
Yeah. And he's wearing a baseball cap and like a hoodie, like things he would never wear in the
Yeah. And well, to me, that always like showed like the depth of this world in a way that like the kind of clumsy world building of like Hollywood movies and stuff does not, because it just came from his heart, like, and his imagination. Like, why not put Dr. Slump and Arare in like a P-38 Lightning dressed in like American like 1940s military outfits? Why not? It's
why
like,
not?
Why not? Okay, let's do this. There's a great illustration of his of Momotaro, like they're in like this kind of futuristic looking tank, and like the pheasant is like popping out of the gunner's turret. Like, Momotaro's out of the gunner's turret. The dog is like leaning against, like smoking a cigarette. I believe the pheasant is actually driving the tank, is like popped out of and it's like, it's so like he's obviously studied tanks. And then he's kind of like made it his own, and then he's crossed it over with Momotaro. Like, what is going on here? Like, I just loved that.
I know. His style is just, it's what makes him a legend,
It is.
So speaking of a legend, how do you think Toriyama is going to be remembered 50 years from now? Like, is he going to be talked about in the same vein as we talk about with Tezuka and Ishinomori?
Or like a Matsumoto Reiji, for instance?
Yeah.
Like, because Matsumoto is sort of the darling of the 1970s scene. Tezuka is 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Matsumoto Reiji is 70s, no question about it. And yes, I think there's absolutely no question that we're going to be talking about Toriyama in the same way, or even bigger, because he flourished and bloomed at a time when mass media was coming into its full powers, so to speak. And so he was able to do things that neither Matsumoto nor Tezuka, even in their wildest dreams, could. He reached places all over the world,
right?
The furthest corners of this planet. And so he is absolutely going to be talked about. And it's not even some hyperbole. He is the biggest mangaka of the 1980s, arguably of the 90s, but hands down, no question, the biggest of the 80s and most profoundly influential.
This is jumping more from like him to Shonen Jump in general. Do you think Oda, the One Piece creator, do you think he's going to be in a similar vein at some point down the line? Or is he so unique to One Piece and just only One Piece? Because I don't really know if he's done much outside of One Piece, to be honest with you.
One Piece is an incredibly successful series, and he is obviously an extremely imaginative and creative person. But I don't get the sense that One Piece is as societally influential as Toriyama's art style was in the 1980s in particular. Like, I just don't see it. Like, to me, Oda and One Piece are an example of an extremely well-honed product, an extremely popular, successful, and well-made product. Among many other well-made products, he's kind of the king at the moment.
Yeah.
But to me, I don't get the sense that it is as impactful, so to speak, in a big picture sense as Toriyama's work was. Toriyama's work was inescapable in the 80s. Oh, I don't want to read a comic book. I want to play a video game. There it is. I'm going to turn off the video game. I want to watch there's the cartoon. Like, and he's doing all sorts of other illustrations and stuff, and other illustrators are imitating him. Like, the entire Gundam series turned it's called Super Deformed. They started to draw the Gundam characters in a really similar way to the kind of ways that Toriyama was drawing in the pages of Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
And you started to see all sorts of these kind of cute, caricatured. It's the roots of what's known as chibi now.
Yeah.
And chibi is a huge thing right now. And it's not that Toriyama invented chibi so much as that he laid the groundwork for the way that it's consumed today. There's roots before him too. But it's like he is the one who made it cool for the masses. So that kind of like, he was a lens, I think, for a lot of different cultures, visual, illustrative cultures, that puts him in a class apart from the very talented and very successful Oda.
Yeah. All right. Well, we talked a lot, man.
Sure
We're hitting an hour already.
Yeah. Well, it's not. I gotta sign off. I gotta read Dr. Slump again, man. You got me excited about this.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to talk about where people can find you on social media and on your blog and your newsletter.
My blog.
I know there's
blog.
Your blog. Well, it's a blog.
Yes, no, it is. And I use it in the URL of my newsletter. So I'm Matt Alt. If you enjoyed this, you can find me on Twitter at Matt_Alt. I'm on Instagram at AltMattAlt. I try to do weekly, but sometimes life intervenes. Newsletter at blog.pureinventionbook.com. And you can find my book, Pure Invention: How Japan Made the Modern World, at pureinventionbook.com, or just type my name into any search engine and look for me at Amazon.
There you go. It's like George Martin's not a blog.
Yes. Blog is such a tainted term. I'm a newsletter writer, damn it.
It just takes me back to LiveJournal and
totally on MySpace. So check out my MySpace page. I should set one. Does it even exist anymore? Probably.
I think Tom's still my friend.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's always a blast. Save some etouffee for me, some gumbo, whatever you're having.
Actually, tonight is red beans and rice.
Oh, so nice.
Monday.
Mail me some.
Yeah, will do, man. All right. Well, hopefully I will see you in June when I'm in Tokyo.
You go look me up, man.
Pure Tokyo cocktails.
Pure Tokyo cocktails. Yes, Patrick and I should launch a new podcast. He and I only drink highballs together. It's you and I who drink the cocktails together.
Okay. All right.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Anytime. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the Krewe of Japan podcast. A huge thank you to Matt Alt for joining us today to pay tribute to a legend, Akira Toriyama. From the advent of Dragon Ball, a cultural phenomenon that continues to inspire legions of fans, to his innovative designs in gaming and emoji, Toriyama's genius knows no bounds. He had a profound impact on the fabric of our culture. From Goku and Arare to Dragon Quest and poop emoji, Toriyama's work has touched all of our hearts and lives, leaving an unforgettable impact on us all, and his legacy will continue to live on for generations to come. If you are interested in hearing more from Matt about these types of topics, I cannot recommend his book enough, Pure Invention: How Japan Made the Modern World. Also check out his newsletter/blog. You can also circle back to past episodes of this little podcast right here to hear more episodes with Matt exploring a variety of topics, from his book, yokai, an exclusive chat with the man behind live-action Spider-Man, and the history of Nintendo. We'll have all of that linked out in the show notes. Which of Akira Toriyama's work means the most to you? Share with us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter X, TikTok while we got it, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, YouTube, at Krewe of Japan Podcast. That's KREWEOFJAPANPODCAST. I mean, you're here, so you probably know how to spell it by now. While you're there on social media, give us a comment, a follow, a like, a retweet, a share. If you're on your podcast app right now, hit that subscribe button. Whatever floats your boat. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast. Or maybe you want to send your feedback in a more private way. Send us an email at kreweofjapanpodcast@gmail.com. KREWEOFJAPANPODCAST@gmail.com. We'd really love to hear from you. Speaking of feedback and hearing from you, if you're enjoying what you're listening to right now, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and, or maybe even a review on your favorite podcast streaming app. Every one of those 5-star ratings and reviews helps others interested in Japan and this kind of content find the podcast. Or hey, just let a friend know about us. That works too. I'm 100% sincere when I say that any and all support is incredibly appreciated. But that's all for today. Until next time. Looking to start your own podcast and don't know what platform to use? Tell me about it. When we started the Krewe of Japan podcast, we tried a bunch of the big name recording platforms, but always came back to the one we're still currently using to this day, Zencastr. Zencastr is now the all-in-one solution making podcasting easy. In addition to its high audio and video quality for podcast production, Zencastr provides a full suite of production tools to record, produce, and publish studio quality content from the comfort of your home. Just log in through your browser and start recording. It's that simple. For us, we simply send out links to our guests and they join the lobby. But before you know it, it's all done and you have your studio quality audio and up to 4K video right there ready for you, right when you finish. The best part is having their multi-layered backups to ensure that your recordings are in the highest quality, regardless of anyone's internet connection stability. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcasts in one place and distribute to all the major destinations. It's really that easy. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code KREWOFJAPAN, KREWEOFJAPAN, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. We want you to have the same easy experiences we do for all of our podcasting and content needs. It's your time to share your story.